In John 7 and verse 32, the Pharisees and the chief priests sent some officers to arrest Jesus. Whenever they came back to the Pharisees and the chief priests, it was realized that they had failed in this task that was set before them. And when they were asked why they had failed, in John 7 and verse 46, we find a very brief yet very insightful response. They said, "No man ever spoke like this man." A countless number of teachers have come and gone throughout the world's history, many of whom have left a permanent mark on society. But none come close to matching the impact of the greatest teacher to ever walk the earth, Jesus Christ. Multitudes were drawn to his teaching and stood in awe because of the authority with which he taught, Matthew 7 and verse 29. His teaching was unique, it was simple, and it was relevant. It carried the weight of divine authority because he is the Son of God, and his doctrine came from the Father, John 7 and verse 16. Those who desire to teach his will would do well to follow his example. But what did Jesus teach? To whom did he teach? And how did he teach it, and why? The content of Jesus' doctrine remains forever unmatched by the minds of men. He came to fulfill the law, Matthew 5 and verse 17. He is the Lord of the Sabbath. The Word became flesh, John 1 and verse 14, and as such, his ability to expound upon divine matters was second to none. His teaching was and continues to be relevant. He spoke about man's origin as those created in the image of God, Matthew 19 and verse 4. He spoke about morality and righteous living. Consider the golden rule that he presented in Matthew 7 and verse 12. Also his teaching about God's intent for marriage, Matthew 5 and verse 28. He dealt with stewardship and personal responsibility in passages like John 5 and verse 40, and Luke 15 verses 11 through 32. He also taught about matters pertaining to salvation, that people are lost in sin, that hell is a real place and salvation is only through Christ, that man must be born again. Certainly Jesus addressed a vast number of subjects during his 3-year ministry on earth, and each one was timely, was applicable. But what was the content? What was it that he was focusing upon? Folks, he was seeking to fulfill his mission to seek and to save that which was lost. He was teaching those things that mankind needed to know and continues to need to know today in order to get their life right with God. One of the many things that differentiated Jesus from other teachers was the fact that he was willing to teach everybody. In Matthew 11 and verse 15 he says, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Jesus taught those who were outcast from society. At times his disciples were amazed at the people that he stopped and he spoke to. Luke records an occasion when Jesus allowed a woman who was likely a prostitute to anoint his feet with oil while he was eating dinner in the house of a Pharisee. Jesus paid attention to those who were sick. He paid attention to those who were crippled. He paid attention to those who were suffering with things such as leprosy. He paid attention to the most rank of sinner. Why? Because all of these people had a soul. All of these people were in need of the saving power that Jesus had come to earth to bring. The way that Jesus taught was so remarkable. He spoke as one with authority. He came and he was speaking those things that God had revealed to him, things that God had instructed him to teach. For remember, as John reveals to us, that Jesus is the Word, the literal Word of God. The things that Jesus spoke, literally, he was speaking from the voice of God. Now, Jesus could be controversial. He was not afraid to speak out on things that were seen as hot issues, issues of the day that many people were not comfortable with. But Jesus knew that in order to teach these people in the way that they needed to be taught, in order to instruct them in the ways of righteousness, he had to proclaim to them the whole counsel of God. And friends, these are just a token few of the reasons that Jesus is the greatest teacher. We thank you for joining us today, and have a blessed day.